Here at the back, did you have a, yeah.
Hi, your comparison between religious and secular communities, I believe you're saying that the North American communities, and if that's the case, do you think there would be much comparison or difference between that with, for instance, communities, for instance, in China that might be secular? If you look at, say, maybe the experience that people in China might have with secular communities in the last, I don't know, couple 100 years, 50 years, would that, do you think, compare and fit with the information that you had in the North American communities? Do you think that might suggest something different for them?
Right, so the longevity of religious utopian communities versus secular utopian communities, that was based in North America. So can you make any predictions for cultures elsewhere, and particularly in China?
Wow, good question. I don't know of any studies done in China on this topic. In fact, the two studies I showed you are the only studies I know of where even people have even looked at this question. Again, I want to remind you, this is a very, very young field. So we're just starting at this, but these are great questions. Do you think that it would be different in China?
My impression of the North American secular communes was that there was maybe a cultural weakness, maybe might be clash in the family organizational structure, and maybe the Chinese secular attempts might have been a little more grounded.
Right. So the comment is that these utopian communities are specific because they were pulled out of the larger society, and the secular ones in the 19th century might have been a bit flaky, and if you went to another culture that had a longer tradition of secular cooperative societies, you might find a different answer. Is that fair?
I'm curious.
Right. Me too.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I don't think that it's impossible to have effective secular organizations. I mean, China is 1 billion people of intensely cooperative people. I mean, China is not the most religious society. I want to emphasize that this argument is largely a historical argument in the sense that I don't think that modern, if you look at modern states like Denmark, you know, I like Denmark because it's the least religious society in the world. I like it just in the sense of like it's an interesting situation where trust levels are extremely high. It's a very cooperative society, yet it's not religious. How could that work? I don't think there is a contradiction there. It's just that my argument is that historically, when the institutions that Denmark has today did not exist, moralizing gods, religions around moralizing gods was the only game in town, whereas now we have other mechanisms that could possibly replace religion. But this is speculation. We don't know. We have to do the research. So it's a good research question.
Here and then behind.
You presented some really interesting evidence for the cultural transmission of religion. But I was wondering if you could share a few insights on the genetic side of things that you mentioned earlier on in your talk. So finding the Darwin and your beliefs that genetic transmission.
Yeah. I don't think that Darwin is any less relevant to cultural evolution as it is to genetic evolution. In the case of humans, that's a very important part of our nature, is that we're cultural species. And that's one. And the second reason why Darwin is so central to cultural evolution is that many of the mechanisms that operate at the level of genes roughly also operate at the level of culture. So we need to take a Darwinian perspective to make sense of culture. So I don't see a contradiction. But to answer your question more directly, the genetic part of all this is do you remember that the diagram I showed you? So the specific domain-specific ways that we think about the world. We have a theory of mind. We have a theory of physics, theory of biology. These are arguably genetically evolved capacities that we have as human beings. Every normal adult human being has it. So in the case of theory of mind, for example, you get deficits in theory of mind, as Dr. Crespi talked about earlier, in the case of the Asperger's autistic spectrum, right? So there's a lot of evidence that there's a genetically evolved capacity. And my argument is that that capacity is central to religious thought. And if you remove that capacity, you can't have religious beliefs. And in fact, we're just running a study as we speak where we are measuring to see if Asperger's spectrum predicts atheism. It should, right? If you have a hard time understanding mental states, you should have a hard time believing in God. There is anecdotal evidence for this also in many churches around, in the United States at least that I know of. There are lots of intense workshops for autistic children because they have recognized that autistic children don't get religion. So that's the genetic basis along with other domains, yeah.
Do you want to follow up?
Oh, just one quick follow-up, sorry. If you could just give us a quick plot summary of donkey lettuce.
So, sorry, for the podcast, I want to say it. Can you tell us about donkey lettuce, please?
I should have come prepared, I'm sorry. I was such in a rush. I was late already. I should have read it before coming back, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You can find it in the Green Brothers volume, I assure you. It's there.
On the issue of trust and the responses you get from individuals, I would be inclined to think that there would be some variation with the developmental part, either by age or by education. Do you find large differences when you break out the data?
So, is there a lot of explainable variation in levels of trust in these experiments? For instance, age, education?
Absolutely. People get more trusting over time, as they get older. There is large cultural variation in levels of trust. There was a recent paper in Science on this, and it's largely explained by, let me see, high gross domestic product and perceptions of corruption correlate very strongly with people playing this game. So there is a logic to the madness. It makes sense, right? So when people are living in societies where they think they trust institutions, then they are more trusting in this game when you put dollar amounts on their choices.
In education? Is there any?
I don't know about education. I don't know if anyone who's familiar with this area of research might chime in, but I'm not. I don't remember if the education is related. It's a good question.
Was there? Yes, here, and then we'll go here, and then on this side.
Does your definition of religion have to include adherence to non-verifiable phenomena like gods and spirits and so on? Because historically there's Buddhism, which although some Buddhists have adherence to gods and spirits and so on, they have a very naturalistic paradigm. And Julian Huxley, the evolutionary biologist, some 50 years ago called for a new religion based on the evolutionary paradigm in ecology and so on. So you could argue that religion could be a totalizing worldview paradigm that addresses the twin concerns of existential anxieties and group cooperation issues.
To paraphrase. Does your definition of religion require belief in things that are unverifiable? Is Buddhism a counterexample to that if that is true? And what is the problem with Julian Huxley's idea that we could have an all-encompassing view of the world that would deal with existentialism and cooperation that didn't have some sort of watcher?
Okay, great set of questions. Let me see if I can do this quickly. I'd love to talk to you afterwards if you're here about this. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll try to be brief now. Buddhism, let me start with Buddhism. Buddhism, I don't think, is a counterexample. A number of years ago, Jason Sloan wrote a book called Theological Incorrectness, in which he tackled this issue. The issue is that when you look at religious texts or what people say, religious authors say, is not always what people are practicing. And what we're interested in is what I want to know what ordinary Buddhists are doing, not what Buddhist theologians are saying. And when you look at Buddhist practice around the world, it's completely infused with supernatural beings. There are ancestor spirits, there are ghosts, people pray to these, or meditate and pray to these spirits. So I don't think that Buddhism is a counterexample, even though in theory you could say that I don't believe in God and be a Buddhist. So, but that's not what we're trying to explain here. We're not explaining the text, we're explaining the people's behaviors. A short, quick answer to your other part of your question. Yes, the Huxley question. I mean, I don't see in principle why you can't try to have an ideology or a belief system, and people have tried it, like communism, that could presumably encourage cooperation and deal with existential problems. I don't know how successful this has been. It's a very recent experiment. The idea of a secular society is very recent, so we'll have to see if that's going to work.